You're listening to Crossing the Axis, the podcast that explores the commercial side of film production, with your host, James Keblas.
Welcome, listeners, and thank you for tuning into the show. Whether you realize it or not, your production company has a culture. It is shaped by the owners, the employees, partners, and even your clients. But should it be more than just the sum of the parts? Should it be curated and developed to such a degree that it is even a specialty or that it has a particular affinity? Potentially even turning away some folks, but then drawing in others and having that kind of differentiation. What does culture even mean in a modern remote environment? How do you build culture, and why is it important to the health of your company? To help us unpack this concept of culture and answer some of these questions is my guest, Sam Kelly Jr. from the wonderfully talented production company and creative studio out of LA called Invisible Collective. Sam, welcome to the show.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me.
So my first question is this an explainer conversation on how to build a cult?
No, we could save that. Maybe at a concert, I can get you into that. There definitely are bands and scenes. I feel like I'm a proud cult member. Maybe we have a little bit of overlap, but yeah, we'll see. But I don't think so.
Well, this is going to be a very fascinating conversation, I think, because there is that line between your curating culture and maybe you get too strong with it and you get kind of cultish, or do you keep it open? And
Sure.
All of the factors in there, I think I'm excited to uncover and talk about a little bit more. And you've done such a good job. Everyone should know that you and I actually have a little history together. We've been around each other in the business for a bit. We actually worked together for a little while. I enjoyed that very much. I've seen your career path, and it's been fantastic to watch. And so on that note, if we're talking about culture, it seems even more important to me anyway, to learn about the person who's sharing that particular perspective. So I was thinking that we'd get started with you and a little bit about, I guess my first question to you is, how did you get into this business? Because if I were to guess, it was around SCAD when you went to Savannah College of Art and Design, and so I saw that you had majored in film and television. Is that your entry into it, or was it even before then?
Yeah, I mean, my passion for it certainly started early. Definitely going to SCAD for graduate school and doing an MFA in film and TV was sort of a step toward really like legitimizing and like aiming myself to have a career. I'd always been able to weave in filmmaking, video making, storytelling from an early age. I think in the time that I came up in school in the, early 90s, especially, like I went from high 8 to digital video to all these things, but I was always wanting to, sort of turn all my class projects into videos, into visual things, and also breaking down stereotypes or, kind of exploring culture and history and connection through visual storytelling, in particular with film and video. So I always sort of, had that instinct, and I definitely grew up in an environment that was like, not shy about, kind of rallying around the news or the TV or a show or a movie and then breaking it all down. And then in terms of like the steps to my career, I definitely, worked to involve, filmmaking into every part of my education. So it happened in elementary school, junior high, high school, college. I would say, the turn into like legitimacy or actually giving me like a real more of a concrete path forward happened when I was an undergrad at Western Washington University. I was like dabbling in all the majors. I was in creative writing and sociology. And then I took a film studies course that was like a comparative literature course between literary works and Stanley Kubrick. And then that's where I started understanding more film theory and things like that. And then ended up kind of segueing into the Fairhaven College of Interdisciplinary Studies. So kind of along my path also, I've been sort of someone who's kind of DIY or wanted to start things. So, Fairhaven offers you the opportunity to essentially, piece together your own curriculum and synthesize, major level courses and independent studies. And I really hit a perfect crossroads where I'd been taking these, film studies courses, but wanted to go into practice. And when I got to Fairhaven, I met somebody who was doing film and psychology, and he was an incredible writer. And he and his best friend had a screenplay, and his best friend is someone that you and I both know, who's Jacob Mosler.
Oh,
He was
right.
a very, incredibly, established, successful first AD, unit production manager, and producer. And so there were some
That's
student
where
films that
that's where you met Jacob.
I was 22,
Oh, I
21.
didn't realize you all went back that far.
Yeah, so he came on to basically produce, the first like college short film that I made with his best friend, and so that's where I was like, wait a minute. And so he came and broke the script down as an AD and had all these like real like concrete, I felt like next steps or opportunities that all of a sudden I realized that like that's what I wanted my career to be. So fast forward a little bit through that, I made student films. I hung on and worked for the university for a minute, and over the summer, along with some other people you may know in the Pacific Northwest. We made a feature film over the weekends, and then after doing that, I thought, okay, one more step to like learn filmmaking or demystify all of the romance and Hollywood stuff. I want to go to film school, and I want to study with teachers who made films or television that I grew up loving. So I was afforded, the opportunity to get to meet people at SCAD, the Savannah College of Art and Design, because while I was making this feature film, I was an active college recruiter and an admissions counselor for Western Washington University. So I was meeting people that were representing all these different colleges. I was going through,
You're
all their
such a great
curriculum.
ambassador for a university, Sam. That's fantastic.
Oh, it was so much fun. I mean, it was like,
Yeah.
being on a solo tour, but just really trying to, not dissimilar to like what my path continues to be in production. It's just,
Yeah.
meeting unique and interesting people, trying to shine a light on opportunities they can have, at a certain place or within a certain industry. And then along the way, I was able to kind of grow my own path toward that, and went to SCAD because when I looked at the IMDb pages for all the teachers, across all the different film schools that I visited, SCAD had a roster of teachers that I just really wanted to hear their stories, and I understood the work that they'd made as a film fan and as an aspiring filmmaker. And so I really went to SCAD kind of as the final precursor then to start finding work and jobs in film.
Yeah. And did you make a decision to go the direction? Now, you talk about your films that you worked on, these narrative films, short films, feature films. But you make your living primarily now in client-based work. When you were going to SCAD or any point, did you make a decision like, oh, you know what? I actually really like client-based work or commercial work, or I tried this but didn't work, or you're keeping it all in play? How did that all come to
Yeah,
life for
not
you?
at all. And I would say that's the one thing that actually like really left remain to be desired at SCAD. Like I got to really learn how to budget and schedule and produce, feature films from people that have been in and around Hollywood and things like that. And I'd certainly studied some indies, but there was kind of next to no commercial knowledge or experience being there. But I'd started to make some music videos and sort of like spec commercials and things like that, just because they were like attainable. They were shorter form. I could explore technique and things like that for myself and with different filmmakers that way. And one thing that's kind of unique about SCAD, being in Savannah, most of the student films or things that you do, anywhere you point a camera in Savannah, like it looks very old.
Right.
It's like this colonial, pre-colonial town. So I actually found myself traveling back to the Pacific Northwest to make music videos or to make my projects, just because I wanted to be
So,
more present day, or I
yeah,
didn't want to be
contemporary. Yeah.
yeah, I didn't want to be trapped in like a bad horror film, of which I made many, when I was there. Yeah, and then ultimately, I think it was the combination of technology accelerating a little bit, and having cameras at that time, the DSLR revolution that could shoot decent depth of field and start to provide a more cinematic language. And I'd had some success in putting together smaller crews and started to get a little bit of awareness in what commercials were or what they could be. But my first couple years in Seattle, I really was just around organizations that were sort of adjacent to the film scene. Like my first job in Seattle after SCAD was at Mopop or EMP.
Hmm.
And I was literally selling tickets and doing group tours. And then I just kind of kept, letting, the higher ups know that I'm from film school. Like I can make videos, I can do this. So I had some time, shooting and editing curatorial videos. I also was volunteering at KEXP, filming some in studio videos. So I just kind of wanted to get my hands on gear and start talking to people. And then there were a couple key opportunities that brought me into the commercial path. And this is right around the time that I gained awareness of you and who you were at the Seattle Office of Film and Music, because I'd left SCAD with this short film script. And it was a script I was really determined to make in Seattle, like right when I got here. And so, in terms of, networking and finding that, like I knew you were like a key person that I needed to know, and that people that were around you were people that were facilitating these projects. And at that time, there was a Washington Filmworks short film incentive. So I'd submitted that script while I was working at Mopop, and then I also worked at Nifty for a while, the National Film Festival for Talented Youth, supporting
Right.
young filmmakers. And then in the process of, sharing that script, going to all these happy hours and things that were curated by the Office of Film and Music, I knew that those were rooms that I had to be in, that these were going to be people that I was going to get to, that I wanted to collaborate with, that I needed to know. Like you
That
were
makes
like
me
on
so
the know
happy
list.
to hear that.
So
I think you may have mentioned something like this before, but hearing it now, it feels, because that's why we did those things. We did those things so that people like you could just find a pathway in and start getting at it right away.
yeah, totally. So I just took every opportunity and just sort of relentlessly just try to put myself in those rooms and show my work. And then I was aware of commercial production companies, and then I had to find sort of a mix of like having a freelance role that was entry level, and then started to meet the key people, then to sort of demonstrate my chops as a producer. So kind of one of my key skills that I honed at SCAD, and a role that I thought was really important to get in the inner circle. And so when I first got on commercials, I was really pitching myself as a script supervisor,
Hmm.
because you're making notes on every shot. You're in between everybody. You get to interact with the director, the DP. You get to talk to the agency or clients at Video Village sometimes and get their feedback. So I instantly was kind of in that circle. And really had a couple incredible opportunities on commercials and short films and all these other areas. And then that also then was the next step into me kind of cultivating the next relationships that would build my career.
Yeah. Did you make a decision to go the director route, the producer route, or even the other side of it, like the creative route? I mean, it seems to me that I know you to be a pretty creative person. So I could even see a path where you almost went the agency side versus the production company side. Did any of
Yeah.
those things kind of present themselves in front of you?
Yeah, I mean, I had a moment with that. I would say I've always been a creative first, and then like my skills that I really work to hone because I am so inspired by collaboration and I love embracing new voices. Really led me down the producing track. And then in terms of directing things, sometimes something just shows up, and my creative mind and producer mind can kind of just merge, and I know how to talk to different departments. And I've just built up those muscles that there are times in my career when a project either comes to my mind or a set of boards come through and I'm like, oh, this is something that I absolutely should direct. So I've always been a producer in creative teams. When I was working in an agency, like I
Hmm.
was the only producer in the creative team. That's
Right.
always how it's been, because I think that's just like my lexicon, my vocabulary. That's what I'm championing, and the nuts and bolts of producing and the skills that I have to be effective at that. I would say are a priority for me. But yeah, I've always been a little bit of an anomaly that way, because there aren't as many producers that are really embedded in the creative side. But I do feel like that's kind of been it's always been my way. It's always been very clear to me that I can do both.
Yeah, right. I want to talk about Invisible Collective, but before we do that, I want to. It strikes me that if we're going to talk about culture, that we're unpacking who you are and your journey and all that. But there's another piece that I know about that I want the rest of the listeners to hear, and that is, your name is Sam Kelly Jr. And if there's a junior at the name, that implies that there's a senior, and
That's right.
that's your dad, right? And I would love to hear more about Sam Kelly Sr., how what he did in his life, because it's a pretty extraordinary story and contributions to society, and your family, and how that's influenced your point of view on culture as we start sliding into that conversation.
Yeah, I mean it's a big and epic story, just about who my dad was, and also just how I came to be through the union with my mom, and how they even got connected. It's a really amazing and beautiful story. But it's one of those things, being a kid, coming up through school, and then realizing that you're living with like one of the most like unsung civil rights activists, leaders, and heroes period.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that person can show up at your school and speak at every MLK Day or every Black History Month and have this lived experience that beasts Forrest Gump. I mean, yeah,
Right.
my dad was born in 1926. The last of five boys, and entered the military when it was a segregated army and served in World War II, Korea, and the Vietnam. In Vietnam, and became an officer, retired as a lieutenant colonel, but led rifle infantry divisions in the Korean War and really fought against, the most hardcore systemic racism, from Jim Crow and beyond. And,
Hmm.
walked the path and interacted with and advised and consulted with heroes that we do know, people like Martin Luther King Jr. and Jackie Robinson and all of that, So there's a book that was published just before he passed that was co-written by Quintard Taylor, who was a professor at the University of Washington. So really, my father's career was in three phases. There was, a military career. Then there was, an activist and academic career where he, after retiring the military, really focused in academia. Got two master's degrees and a PhD, and then was the first vice president for minority affairs and diversity at the University of Washington.
Hmm.
So, all the social unrest, in the late 60s, really had to deal with, the integration of society, and the integration of higher education was a huge part of that. So my dad, so coming from a military background, also being a really staunch academic, and coming from that tradition, Charles Odegaard, the president of the University of Washington, sort of
Right.
handpicked him
Oh, that's
to come
amazing.
and establish that program because there was a good degree of social unrest across colleges, universities, and here in Seattle, it was definitely earlier in the phase. I think he was maybe the
Hmm.
second or third vice president ever appointed in that kind of a position. So, you hear about in our, corner of the world, students like Larry Gossett who came in and sat in on
Hmm.
protests and things like that. Like my dad was the administrator, and you
Wow.
hear about Black Panthers who are getting locked up, and my dad was the one to go visit them in jail. And these are also the people that showed up at barbecues,
Yeah.
and all that. And I think in particular, the beautiful union of my dad and mom. My mom was equally an activist. She was somebody who, out of high school, had the opportunity to become a teacher. She also had the opportunity to go work in the Kennedy campaign,
Mm.
and she was somebody who always was pushing against the grain as well, who came from, rural parts of Washington that had really progressive ideas and politics. And then, my parents, met at University of Washington, and they'd both previously been married. But, life happens, and, they found themselves in love. And, my dad's first wife, tragically passed, and my mom had moved on from her first marriage. And then they kind of instantly knew that they were for each other, and that
We can't control love, man. It controls us.
yeah, and something about what they wanted to do in the world and how they wanted to affect change in society and how they wanted to build culture was, through their careers. And then I think there also was something deeper where they wanted to sort of contribute to the world. And that kind of became me, like I was not an accident, so I think about that, yeah, a decent amount, so I think about my purpose here and like
Yeah.
what I sort of can live for and be liberated and free on my own, but also where I come from is hugely important. And I think you really set me on a path to, you know, um, to walk this earth knowing that I can really contribute. I can really do something because I had so much proof before me and I saw how happy they were. And I think there's some expert modeling, that I got to experience that frankly, like not many people do. Um,
Yeah. Sam, thank you so much for sharing that story. There was even more in there that I didn't know, and I'm just glad that I do know it now. And I think I think it really sums up. I mean, the idea of even doing cultural conversation was your idea, actually. We were talking about different things that we could do on the podcast. He's like, I want to talk about culture, and the more I thought about it, I was like, oh, that's so perfect. I think that's exactly what we should talk about. Um, And
I
then there's
think too, like in relation to the context of the podcast, which I'm so hyped that you're hosting it and that you took over the reins, is that that's something that's I think unique about the commercial world. It is always trying to synthesize and kind of serve up culture in some type of way. And so,
hmm
as somebody who really embraces visual storytelling, and I'm not shy about my love for TV or film and all of that, like I also don't want to be shy about commercials, and I don't want to be shy about what I think they get right and what I think they can get wrong, and the process in which how they come to be. So I think I'm interested and engaged with that, and I think also as a part of that too, as it's continued to grow and like the medium has transcended onto so many different screens and what as a commercial has changed. There's also the culture of how they're made, who makes them, and where they end up. And I think there's a huge opportunity there for employment. I think there's a huge opportunity for sort of like affecting and creating change within people, because that's what it's designed to do, and it's also a
hmm
little bit interruptive, and I think that the ways that there can be some like healthy disruption in the commercial space is something that's also kept me interested in it.
Yeah. Well, so if I'm hearing you right, you're talking about maybe the inspiration that has come from your family and something that set you off on a journey, and you're talking about using your work in commercials as a platform for continuing that. Is that the right way to understand what you just said?
Somewhat. I also think it's behind the scenes too, So I
hmm
think it's definitely in the work itself to create and move and shift culture. And sometimes that can be educational. Sometimes that can just be emotional and feeling
hmm
and fantastical and story driven. But I also think it's the opportunity to participate, and that's ultimately what if you look at you know um, any programs that have served underrepresented people, much like the Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity at UW, and regardless of race, class, creed, or color, and all of that is really people that have been overlooked and underrepresented, getting a chance to get an education. Is
Yeah.
where my parents were, and I
Yeah.
think that my role is similar to that, but it also leads to employment. It leads to a lot of other areas that I think, that need to authentically be drafted and cultivated, from the diverse population that the world is. You know what I mean? And that isn't just people of color. It isn't just a box to check. It's always evolving. And culture changes. And I think that that's something. That's just essential to understand. And I think that's something that you sort of see in the commercial realm. It tries to evolve and then doesn't, and then yeah.
Yeah, one of my missions and what I'm trying to do these days, and we'll actually hear more about this in future podcast, is also open up that pathway to employment and career and expression for people that aren't in there now. We have some
That's
programs that
right.
we're developing out of Seattle that we're doing that we feel like this business is so. First of all, it exploits people, right? It exploits a lot of underserved people to sell stuff, but we often it doesn't use those resources enough to keep that going, right? It's not employing those resources while it's exploiting it. And I want to see that part change, and grow. I want to see the part where it's employing it and the people. Commercial is a form of exploitation no matter what, but at least it could be the people that are, that we're talking about be actually making the stuff and find employment. And there's so many pathways into this business that don't require college education, that don't require, I mean, you can,
That's
a good
right.
idea and hard work. And there's even unions and there's strong labor. And there's all kinds of things I think that's really healthy and ripe. And I want to see that change. And you are even ahead of that though, because I want to transfer this conversation into Invisible Collective, because Invisible Collective is the change in my mind. You're talking about I would say a radically inclusive company, with a kind of a forward thinking, a different kind of approach. How do you describe Invisible Collective?
Yeah, I mean, you actually nailed like one of my favorite ways to get into it, which is a radically inclusive, always culturally relevant production company and creative studio. I think the beautiful thing is that we're all really united by a mission of inclusion, and that goes beyond who we are as individuals, who we are as like-minded people. It's being able to swim in your blind spots and to build a community of storytellers, filmmakers, creatives, to go out and be a part of that change,
hmm
ultimately. So I think you nailed it dead on.
Yeah. And so I'm curious about the name Collective. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think there's two things. It's definitely a little subjective, but as far as what it means in the company, it really is the community and artists and filmmakers that are a part of the work that we do. So that starts with the six of us that run the company. Like, we are a collective of people that are aligned with this mission to affect and create change and to bring undiscovered new voices into filmmaking and commercials and all those other things.
Mm-hmm.
And then ultimately it means too, I think there's a building quality to it, to actually be collecting people, to collect and build community. Like, there's an ongoing effort from everybody at Invisible to continue to meet and engage with new people. And I think that's something that's just like always been innate with me.
Oh,
I'm
that's
very social
interesting.
and I'm a connector, but I write back every cold email. I take any Zoom, because you never know who's going to be there, and we really invite people to be active participants in who we are and what we're about. In some areas, that's there's some exclusivity. We have a roster of directors that we represent exclusively for commercials and music videos, but then also the collective itself, when we're putting together creative teams, if we writers, photographers, designers, editors, that's the collective is our well, or our pool of talent and knowledge that we can go to, that are people that we know, or one or two steps away from people that know who we are. So it's kind of like this ongoing chain of referrals, that kind of builds up a network of people that do find themselves really united around what we're doing, and knowing that we are their advocates, to find that great work for them. We are their advocates to help them keep a roof over their head. We are their advocates to learn and grow and develop as artists. So yeah, I think there's always a part of a mentorship that's there, but ultimately the collective part is who we are as a company, who we are as storytellers, and that there's this ongoing effort to build community and to really tap into that to make the best work possible.
Right. And that's different than the studio part, right? So there's a collective and a studio. I'm trying to remember if I saw it right.
They're one and the same. Like, a creative studio is essentially a home for our ideas. That's
Mm-hmm.
an area where if we're doing creative development on something, and a brand or an agency can ask for a certain kind of expertise that maybe they don't have. So
Yeah.
that allows us to put together like a bespoke or unique creative team that largely is going to come from members of our collective, people that are in our network or just outside of it that we think would be right. And that's also the opportunity for us to bring in people that maybe share in some of our experiences, or that also expand upon the experiences that the creative brief or the script or anything else offers.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did Invisible Collective get started?
Yeah, I mean, it really started, we have three core founders from Invisible: Justin Pope, Mel Jones, and Stephen Love Jr. And they all came at filmmaking from their own, unique and special angles. Justin, somebody who had worked in the larger agency world and also had worked on the client side for a sports brand. Mel had been an indie feature producer, producing feature films with first-time directors. And, Stephen is an everyday studio movie producer. And so I think they all saw the flaws and the challenges and just the lack of inclusivity in advertising. They
Mm-hmm.
also saw the lack of like ongoing opportunities for underrepresented directors, primarily directors of color at the onset, who just didn't have enough work. Making a movie, it's like every year or two or three you get to do it. In between that, what can you do? Well,
Mm-hmm.
commercials are kind of interesting, in that realm. They're, the industry's always, got money, flowing through it. Ideally at its best is looking for those new voices and those exciting filmmakers or exciting voices to tell those stories. But at the end of the day, there really wasn't a production company that was really centered around this inclusive concept to what each of them had seen. And I think that each of our founders knew the wealth of talent that they could have. So then that kind of moved on to, okay, let's start a production company. Let's get our first few directors signed, and let's get some sales reps to kind of put us out there and understand what's there. So I think, it also is built in the name of accountability, I guess, is
Mm-hmm.
the other part of it too. The inclusion and accountability part, where people know that if they come to us, that they're investing and spending their money and their time with a company that really walks their talk.
Right. Yeah. Right. The accountability of a DEI policy, for instance.
Yeah, that can definitely be part of it. Yeah.
Right. Right.
hmm
Yeah. And what year did this all go down and get
I
started?
mean, this started just before the pandemic. So, about 4 years ago is when the company officially started. And then I've been a part of it for about a couple years now. So kind of like tail I don't want to say tail end of the pandemic, but year and a half or so into it, is when I
Yeah.
sort of became aware and had my first conversation with those folks.
Yeah, you said it's what is it? I'm trying to figure out how operationally how it works. There's six full time, six W-2s, and then the rest are 1099s, or how's that all work?
Sure. Yeah. So we have our three founders. So two of our three founders are directors.
Uh-huh.
Mel and Justin Polk are directors. Steven, movie producer. And then the first hire to kind of expand and legitimize, Invisible as a production company was our managing director and EP, Tracy Norfleet. And Tracy comes from a hardcore, epic commercial background, working with all the major players, in and around LA and globally, So she's definitely a legend, and I've gotten to learn so much. So that was sort of the fourth hire. And then myself came on board, and then we just hired another EP who's representing directors from the Hispanic and Latino markets, and also
Right.
representing invisible directors to do work abroad. So that's kind of like our first step as we're growing and to kind of building out this, cross-cultural, concept where, we're going beyond our borders. We're going beyond, what we know to continue to, live up to our mission.
Yeah. So, do you have some foolproof way of deciding who gets the best job when it comes in? I can imagine like a, yeah, no, I want that job. No, I want that job. And like who
No, I
decides
mean,
who
I
gets
think
it?
the things talking about culture, like the way that comes in and where they go, we all create this space to know each other and speak about those things. And sometimes it just depends on the needs. Obviously a good agency or client relationship means that that particular EP is going to stick on that project all the way through because that's essential. But then so there can be, there's so many different pathways that jobs can come in. They can come in through reps. They can come in, organically. People just reach out to us. They can come as a part of our own networking, the fruits of our networking labor going directly to brands or to functions and things like that. So yeah, there's a number of ways, but I think it's really just honoring the kind of core relationship to see the project through. And that can be with an agency or client producer. It also can be with a creative team. It also can
Hmm.
be around the material itself. And I also think that there's interesting ways that those can also kind of counterpoint each other. Like I've certainly had projects where, I've really been so invested in the creative and then the style of work or, the learning opportunity to work with an agency of a different size or a different mission or a different scale, like allows me to grow. So there's no one good answer. But, we definitely take the time to be so thoughtful, about who's going to be on the journey of the project, and if that's from creative development through post, or if that's from the boards through handing off all the footage, that's something that we're really mindful of. And I think our culture of inclusion and who's on first, what's on second, we take
Hmm.
the time to have those conversations, every week.
Yeah, and I am going to dive back into the cultural conversation, but just to understand the kind of context here. So, would you say that Invisible Collective does most of its work with agencies or direct to brands, 50-50? How would you split it up?
It's a mix, yeah. I mean, it'll probably always change. I mean,
Hmm.
I think in the last year, like the number of projects specifically were probably more from an agency, but some of those projects, ended up being creative studio projects where we are involved in the creative, so it's a little bit more of a direct to brand feel. But yeah, I would say yeah, the pendulum swings. Yeah, quite a bit actually. I would say it's probably like 60-40 last year, and then this year 60
60,
40,
60.
60-40 brand direct, or yeah, and then now I think maybe on the flip side where it's been a little bit more agency driven this year.
Hmm. Yeah.
I have to look into all the facts, but the pendulum definitely swings.
Do you have a preference for one type of business or the other?
That's a good question. I mean, not a strong one. I think for me, it's just all about like how can we engage with the creative, And so, we've had opportunities to do creative development with agencies and direct to brand, but then also like when we're dealing with scripts or boards that have come in there. For me, it's just like, what's the level of engagement that the director gets to have? What's the level of engagement that the production company gets to have to make it the best thing that it can be? So
Hmm.
I do feel like they're pretty similar. I think the only area where it can really differ is in post production, and I think that's an area that with agency jobs we don't carry 100% into post. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's kind of fun sometimes, like, because, people have their ways and they have their collaborators. And if you get to do something really special, like this thing that we just filmed last week, like, we won't be doing the post on it, but I know all the footage that's there. I know the depth of the story, and I know the creative team at the agency are so hyped that it's going to be something totally wild and different. It's a totally different set of circumstances. So I almost equate it to like bands in the studio. Are you going to be with the producer and the label, or are you going to be, a little bit closer to home, and putting it together? And I don't think that either way, I don't have a strong preference from like records that I just listen to. But yeah, it's just like a different set of things. And I think the amount of stakeholders, the amount of like, fingers on the project, at the end of the day, it feels more similar than it does different, especially now. I think, especially on the brand side too, there are a lot of hunger creatives. There are a lot of creative teams that are built. There's a lot more, especially when you do something well, more eyes get on it. So then it feels a little bit more like an agency project.
Yeah,
So
right. Yeah,
I
yeah.
definitely think it's different. And I'm glad to see that, the doors opening a little bit when it comes to creative development and creative engagement.
Yeah.
When it comes to either inheriting a set of boards and getting to add a unique point of view onto that, or when it comes to, hey, we have this product and this much money, and we want to know what your ideas are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, so Invisible has grown over the past 4 or 5 years, and as it's grown, does that how difficult is it to maintain a particular point of view or a particular culture as more people are coming on, especially considering that it starts out as a black focused, collective, or maybe not. Maybe I have that wrong.
Yeah, I
But
would say that wasn't the focus. I mean, we're a black owned and founded organization, and certainly in the time that in 2020, from all the atrocities and George Floyd and protests and beyond, there certainly
yeah,
became like the spotlight kind of was there. It's like I
right.
feel like we've been waving our hands as like underrepresented people, saying like, hey, like we're out here, and then all of a sudden like the helicopter flying over like shines the spotlight down, and like we see you. And so it's great. So it's definitely like it's a yes and thing,
Mhm.
But I definitely think that uh,
But
that's
it's
what I talk about
expanded
when
over the years, right? New people have come on board, and different non-black folks are,
For
so
sure.
how
I
does
think
that?
there's a certain moment too where like, as a company founded by people with a lived black experience that like that makes us subject matter experts to a certain degree to the outside world. So, people want to call us for Black History Month, and it's great. And those projects are really fulfilling. But I think at the end of the day, living up to our mission, living up to the best of who we are as people in, the culture and status that we live in, it's about going yes and it's that and
Right.
beyond. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So
100%.
uh, yeah, so it was interesting. I think some of those earlier calls where people were after a specific slice of who we are, there was a certain amount of urgency that was there.
Yeah.
And I
Right.
think that that's just generally when people are reacting to something, it feels very urgent. And for us, it's just been our life. But also in the mission, like adding Los Invisibles and adding the directors that we do, like we've always known from the jump that our mission is who we are and beyond who we are, and that's what inclusivity is. So
Hmm.
that's not dissimilar to like my dad's mission, thinking that the Office of Minority Affairs and Diversity at UW was only for people of color. It's like wrong. Like
Hmm.
30% of people who came through there were underprivileged white students. So I don't like having to explain that like it's yes, we work beyond who we are, because that would be very antithetical to our mission if we were exclusive in any way. But yeah, certainly the ways that we've grown, I think, is also indicative of our culture, because we are having these conversations every day about who we are and how we want to build, and that going into our own blind spots, that going into languages and places that we are less familiar with, and not tokenizing anybody along the way, but
Hmm.
creating an invitation and a platform for people to do that. And I think that that's really driven our directorial signings. That's really driven what we can do and what we can
Hmm.
offer as a production company, is this larger well of people, that we are sharing this common culture of inclusivity and sharing this common culture about how to move the needle. And I think that's kind of like, that's it right there. It's like there's a culture rallying around any production company around like, all right, wait, what do you do? What's your mission? What do you want to make? but also like in the world of like working in creative industries, I think an equally important part, and maybe even more important part, is how do you have those conversations? How do you open up the floor to understand or learn from somebody? How do you open up the floor to engage with the creative and take it to a new place? How do you open up the floor to talk about people or places or things beyond your experience? You know, and I
Mm-hmm.
think that that is the area that like Invisible particularly thrives, is that we're not afraid of that, and we create a really safe place for
Mm-hmm.
people to learn and grow and be involved in what we do.
I think that that's the takeaway of this conversation so far, for sure. I totally see it. It's so clear in your work and the way the company represents itself that it's driven that way. And when I think about, actually, I mean, I see such unlimited potential for Invisible and expanding, because it does operate from that, particularly from a creative point of view. The no fear, the willingness to try stuff out, the willingness to be open, the willingness to explore, but do it in a way that is from a different points of view, bringing those voices into the conversation to drive that exploration. I just think that, I think it makes better work. I think it shows up in the work. I see it, and I can see it expanding quite a bit.
Thanks. Yeah, I think there's just a certain like humble quality that's like important to share, you know, because we all
Hmm.
want to learn and grow and develop, and to invite in unique points of view is sort of an exquisite risk, for people to come in and feel safe in sharing all of that. And like I said, I think that's just ultimately like where we thrive.
Do you have some kind of a do you have principles that you have written down that people have to understand and subscribe to be part of the collective, or any cultural founding documents that are really important to reiterate often, or
Well,
any things that you say, what's something written on the wall, what anything like that?
sure. I think we each have our own versions of it. I mean, we have a manifesto on our website, that I think has certainly drawn people to us, myself included. Another thing that's really important is, like I said, that word safety. So, our safety meetings on set, we talk about having a healthy and fun and safe set environment. And of course, that relates to, grip and electric, and it relates to,
Hmm.
big lights or cranes on stands, but also it just is. It revolves around how you feel and being who you are and feeling like you're safe to communicate your ideas, particularly around actors, around creatives. And if you're exploring like cultural nuance, or you're just portraying anything, like you need to feel safe about that. And I think that, the safety on set, in addition to all the health and safety regulations, it really is sort of like a culture of safety and a culture of creativity that we really demand. So no racism, no sexism, no homophobia, all those types of things. Like integrating that from that beginning safety meeting and giving people a safe place to go should anything arise within them. I think that's something that I think people, after we wrap production, they feel a little different, and they feel like, oh, I want to be on the next one. So, in particular, if I'm directing, I really make a point to kind of expound upon that more. And I think each director can kind of set the tone of their set. But, we do have sort of a uniform statement that we like our ADs to read that talks about health and
Hmm.
safety, and that safety, kind of going beyond, just the lights in the stands and things like that, and going into the safety of how you feel and being able to express yourself.
Yeah, and I love that. I've been a part of many of those conversations at the safety meeting as well. I've incorporated that into production, and it's so critical. It does. First of all, it establishes a safe space, and it just in production, things are going to get stressful, things are going to get intense, and it can bring out bad tendencies from people. And knowing that there's a play, like, first of all, recognize it before someone does act that way. Check yourself, and also when it does, that there's a place for someone that is on the receiving end of that to be able to talk about it, and to hey, did I not see something right, whatever. And that could show itself in a variety of ways, that whether that's racially motivated, or whether that's gender stuff, or whether that's just being some kind of a bully, jerk, jock kind of bullshit, whatever, that there's having those explicit expectations set out in the very beginning, like this is the way we expect to operate, this is the way we expect you to operate, and it goes way beyond just the OSHA, electrical codes. It gets
Yeah,
into
yeah, and hopefully it's
people.
a liberating transition, where you can feel free to be who you are, and for people to see you for who you are, in an effort of being creative.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and it makes people uncomfortable a little bit, and I think it's still making people uncomfortable, and I think that's good. And so
Yeah, for sure. I mean, our industry has had a lot of toxicity woven into the DNA about how we work, and so I think it's become more apparent that how flawed and toxic and unsafe that has been in the past, and so I love seeing sort of these like restorative moments, being able to guide our workforce, to be able to guide our industry into a healthier working environment because it only makes for better creativity.
yeah. And so Invisible is it's a bit, it's LA based, and but everyone kind of is moving around doing different jobs in different parts, maybe even entering international waters. How do you keep culture while there's so much activity and so much movement and people aren't around each other all the time?
Yeah, so LA is our headquarters, but we definitely have satellites. Like right now, I'm in like our Seattle satellite studio, so I can, host in-person things and all of that. And we really try to honor the spaces that we all come from, So we are spread out a bit. I'm up here in Seattle. We have a couple in LA. We have a couple on the East Coast in Atlanta and Virginia. Fingers crossed, we're working on opening a New York spot, and we'll continue to have these little outposts. But in terms of how we sort of maintain our culture as those of us that drive the company and with our directors, definitely, predictable energy is something I'm a big fan of. So we have very predictable spaces that we enter into. Those of us that run the company, we have a meeting at the top of every week, that's kind of structured around projects, but also can open up. We also have a quarterly in-person meeting that we do, and that kind of rotates between locations. So that whether that's at Sundance or whether we are going to LA and then using our in-person time together to have more in-person meetings with people in markets or places that we want to show up. So that's something that I think is important. We all honor where we come from, and so there really isn't like a big push for us to be holed up or centered or focused on one thing. And so kind of these rotating meetups and things like that is important. And also in the context of other remote spaces, we definitely just use some very basic tools to unpack our ideas, so we will put together sort of a light outline, a retreat agenda, go over certain topics, and then kind of create room to play, create room to drag
Hmm.
and drop images that come to mind on a shared whiteboard. We can create room to do all of that. And then we also create room for vulnerable conversations, and each of us at Invisible in some ways is a bit of a team leader, as far as you can go to this person for these types of things, whether it's about interpersonal dynamics, or whether it's about feature film ideas, or whether it's about these other areas. So I think we all know where to go to, but just the degree of respect that we each have for where we come from, that when we enter into one place together, it's really exciting, and how we kind of give each other the floor if we're at a conference or something, or how we decide, okay, I want to go learn in this session, and then, oh no, but I really want to connect with these people because I can really talk the talk, and I really also understand the substance of this session or of this screening, so I really feel like it's going to be really successful to our business if I can go engage with that. So
Hmm.
it's really fun. I mean, when we were at Sundance this year, it was amazing having the Sundance Film Festival happening, directors that we represent that are in the festival, being else, and concurrently during the film festival, there's the brand storytelling conference, which has some of our
Right.
clients on things that we're doing. So we were all able to kind of go as a group to some things and then kind of splinter off. And then we were all staying in one house together, and then being able to kind of unpack our experiences from there about what we learned, how we wanted to grow, maybe some, successful wins or leads that we really felt like we were able to kind of capture, or like digital connections that we made real. Yeah, so we're always fostering, that our culture. One, because we're so aligned on our mission, and again, two, because our culture is creating the space for new ideas and new people and new voices, and that's just the world we live in. So we're just every day. I feel like we're active participants in our company culture.
Well, Sam, I am a fan of yours. I've been a fan of Invisible since you pointed them out to me, and I love what you're doing. And I think there's so much potential in it on so many levels. as we're so I'm in the cult. So I want to be in the cult.
I'm in your cult.
There we go. There we go. And so I guess any final thoughts on someone that's about to break out and grow a production company, or they're going from freelancer to creating a company. Any thoughts and any wisdom that you might share? It could be on anything, but particularly around culture and making that.
Oh, gosh, I mean, I think you just have to really be excited to be outside of yourself. Like I don't think culture is something that is revolves around like one vision, one leader, or anything like that. I think it's always kind of breaking its own borders. And I think that as you engage with films, commercials, TV, all of that, like that's something that's really important. Like you really have to be willing to go, into uncomfortable places. You have to be willing to also embrace points of view that are not your own and be excited by that. Like I'm just endlessly curious about people. I'm always looking to, kind of grow in that way. So, I think, ultimately it should be centered around creating great work. But I think, it's less and less about what you can do as a production company, in my opinion. We all know what we can do. We can, do live action, we can do animation, we can write scripts, we can do photography. Like there's more tools available now more than ever for like what you can do. I think for me, my whole, mission and career has been guided about why, like why do I do this? Why should you work with us? And for me, that why is that I really care about how people are seen and reflected in popular culture, which is largely through films, TV, advertising. Why am I sticking with a production company and why am I sticking with my producing skills? It's because I want to continue to diversify and expand the workforce in film, televisions, and commercials. Those are the things that drive me every day. And so I think if you're trying to start something, just think about why and like a substantive why. Like it can be like, yeah, I want to make cool stuff. And it's like, yeah, but why? And I think that's something that at the end of the day, I think should go outside of, yourself. You know what I mean? Like I do think it's a service-based thing when you're working, the hours that we do, when you're engaging with the clients and customers that we do. And so, why do you want to work with those people? Well, because I'm curious about them. I want, people that I work with to feel, seen and heard, and I want them to grow in the process, and I think that, it's also an area like why I continue to do it. It's, a field that's dedicated to lifelong learning, and I think that that's something that I've, having parents that were in academia and things like that, that's something I've been able to embrace. And so, I think for anyone looking to start something or even just engage with this industry is just thinking about your why above anything else.
I love that. That is perfectly well said, and I think a perfect way to wrap up the conversation. Sam Kelly Jr., thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you, my friend. See you soon.
All right. See you soon.
Thank you for listening to Crossing the Axis with James Keblas. If you're interested in joining the conversation or have a topic you'd like covered, please drop a note at keblas.com. That's Keblas.com.